Good morning, everyone. First, can everybody see my drawing? I just want to make sure that I've tried to make it as legible as I can, but between my handwriting and Zoom, I don't know if everyone can see it, but
We can see it, Melbourne.
okay. So today I thought about talking a little bit about Buddhist psychology and the Abhidharma, and the compilation of writings related to what's considered Buddhist psychology, and how that, for me, over the years, relates to something that seemed totally disconnected at first, Koan practice. For me, sometimes at the beginning, they seemed rather different things, but now I'm not so sure. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the basics of Buddhist psychology as found in the Abhidharma, and then maybe we can have a little bit of a discussion, if there's time left, about how it relates to koan practice. So in Buddhist psychology, there's obviously the mind, and this is I didn't make this up. I'm actually, and it's interesting because I first saw Thich Nhat Hanh do this, and it's interesting that this came to mind yesterday when I was thinking of my Dharma talk, because today is the anniversary of his passing. It's actually today. I saw that at Upaya out in New Mexico, they're having a ceremony today for Thai. So, maybe we're channeling a little bit of Thich Nhat Hanh today. So, in Buddhist psychology, we have the overall mind, and the mind is looked at as having two aspects. Let's call them, not parts, because that makes it sound dualistic. But the mind consciousness is the part of our consciousness, our awareness, where things we're aware of in the moment. Okay, so these are feelings, perceptions, mental formations, things that we are aware of right now, that we're experiencing, let's say. But then there's also what's called the store consciousness. And the store consciousness is not, it's not really the subconscious like we would think of necessarily in Western psychology. The store consciousness is the part of our consciousness where the different mental formations, kind of the seeds of these different mental formations reside. And by mental formation, I mean anything that arises, right, is a mental formation. Anger, joy, love, hate. I mean, anything that arises is considered a mental formation. Anything that we become aware of. So in our store consciousness, we have all these different seeds. We all have seeds of anger. We all have seeds of love and joy and happiness, and we all have that capability, right? We have those seeds in our store consciousness, and as we go through life, where we perceive things with our eyes or hear things with our ears, with all of our senses, then what can happen is one of these seeds will rise up into the mind consciousness, and then we're aware of it. We're happy, we're sad, we're angry, we're whatever that kind of mental formation is that we're going to experience in the present moment. And especially in Thai's tradition, this is where mindfulness comes into play. And if anyone's ever worked with the four establishments of mindfulness or any of those other Buddhist teachings, that it's really focused on this process, I think, is that so with mindfulness, right, we can be present to whatever this mental formation is that's come up, right? If it's anger or happiness, whichever one we want to pick, then we're present to that, and we're present to the experience of being angry, being happy. It seems like a lot of time is spent looking at and trying to be present to the maybe what we call unwholesome mental formations, maybe negative ones, right? Anger, resentment, those kinds of things. But the same thing applies to the wholesome ones: happiness, joy, love, equanimity, all of those things. It's the same process. So with mindfulness, we can create a little space, and we can decide whether or not, in Thai's words, water the seeds that have come up into our mind consciousness. Right? If a mental formation, the mental formation of anger comes up, and we water that seed of anger or that mental formation, then anger will continue to grow. Right? Anger will, and when it recedes and comes back down into our store consciousness, maybe that seed is now a little bigger. And so this mindfulness practice of the four establishments of mindfulness, I think, is a methodical way of going through the different kinds of things that arise in the mind and working with them. So if, for example, we intentionally choose not to water the seed of anger, right? We step back, we calm ourselves down, we try to look at things clearly. We go for a walk, we create some space around that, and we don't water it, then maybe it'll come down and it's a little weaker in our store consciousness, and maybe won't be the seed that first springs up, right? Or let's say we have a mental formation, we don't like people that seem to be in positions of authority, right? If we work with that seed over time, as it comes up and out of our store consciousness, then maybe by actively or intentionally not watering it, we can, when it does come up over time, maybe it's a little less strong, a little less troublesome. Maybe we're a little less reactive, and it doesn't necessarily control us as much as it has in the past. So this is kind of from a Buddhist psychology standpoint, this is kind of the process that happens within our awareness between the mind consciousness and the store consciousness, and how with mindfulness we can work with our mental formations. So in the four establishments of mindfulness, for those that aren't familiar with it, there's the Buddha taught there's four establishments, four things that we can kind of base our mindfulness in. Mindfulness of the body in the body. So there's those practices that most of us, I'm sure, have engaged in before. Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the breath, the body scan, deep relaxation, those kinds of practices. Mindfulness of feelings in the feelings, which is being mindful of what's called vedana, that initial like, dislike, or indifference to everything that comes up that we perceive. Like whether it's sound, something we see, something we hear, something we feel on our skin, or something we taste. There's always this initial feeling of like, dislike, or indifference. And there's a number of practices that the Buddha taught his followers related to that. And then there's mindfulness of the mind in the mind, being mindful of this process of the mental formations that come up, what our body's reaction to them are. You know, when we talk often about when anger arises, it's not only a mental experience, it's also a very physical one, right? We feel it here, we feel it in our stomach, you know, resentment, fear has a physical component to it. And then mindfulness of dharmas or phenomena, however we want to look at that, is looking deeply at the true nature of things, right? We can call this a stick, we can call it whatever we want, right? But at its nature, there's no stick. There's, from the absolute perspective, this is made up of other things, and those other things are made up of other things. And so the fourth establishment of mindfulness, we can do that with all things, and we can do that certainly with our own existence, right? Is there any specific piece of me that is just made up of Andy and can't be divided into something else? So those are the basics of mindfulness practice, kind of in the way I learned them in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. But what I've been reflecting on lately is how the basics of Buddhist psychology work in terms of koan practice. And because at first, to me, they seem to be different things. I was interested in koan practice because I felt I needed a shove of some kind. I needed something that would really, you know, put me at the edge or push my buttons or make me go a little deeper than I was used to. So it seemed to be a somewhat removed in some way from this basic teaching of Buddhist psychology, how the mind consciousness, the stored consciousness work together, how mindfulness comes into play, and how we work with mental formations. And what's come to me really lately is that they're really not two different things. They're these two areas of practice for me have really become the same, in the sense that they're both they both lead us in the same direction, to the same realization, to realizing, hopefully a little bit at a time or in big ways, what our true nature is, our Buddha nature. And so in terms of the koan practice, and the reason I wanted to share this, because I think it, for some of us, me included, when I started, koan practice can be difficult at times, right? It pushes our buttons. It pushes our mental formations around success and failure. It's like baseball, right? It's sometimes you strike out and sometimes you don't. So the koan practice can be difficult in certain ways, in that it can bring up mental formations that are difficult to deal with. Of course, if we, at least for me, when I started looking at what koan practice elicited from me and the kinds of things that came up with koan practice, and I looked at it from the standpoint of Buddhist psychology and what the Buddha originally taught, it started to make a lot more sense. Koan practice brings up, especially these red ones. I don't know if you can tell that these are red, but koan practice, I think, is a way of intentionally bringing up some of the mental formations, at least for me, that were the most difficult to deal with, and then makes us look at it and experience it, not only as a concept, but as a feeling. And if we can combine, our mindfulness practice and koan practice in the context of the koans bring up the ultimate, for me, I think it's the ultimate mental formation, and that is my sense of separation, that I'm separate from everything. Right? Over and over, hundreds of koans. It makes me anyway, look at what is separating me from the koan. What's in the way of me merging or being one with the koan and allowing the response to come up? Because the responses usually only come up when I've let go of my sense of separation from what the koan is about. And so in this way, I think if we look at koan practice from this standpoint, it might be a little easier to see that the difficult things that the koan brings up is exactly what the koan is for. The koan is not necessarily just to get it right and move on to the next one and say, okay, I'm now on number 104, right? The purpose of the koan is to do this, to bring up the red one, right, in a big way, so that with mindfulness, then we can sit with that, right, and sit with, okay, I don't know the answer, but there's this thing that keeps coming up that's in the way. For me, sometimes it's something outside of the koan, outside of my sitting practice. It's something at work, at home. There's something going on that's separating me in some way. And it's interesting to me that depending on what the koan is, what gets in the way, the mental formations that keep me from merging with the koan are different. For example, everyone probably remembers the girl of it for a male student, the girl over there, right? If everybody remembers that, or for a female student, the guy over there, right? I mean, what is that thing that keeps us from merging with either with the girl over there or the guy over there, or mood, or the oak tree in the garden, right? There's something in my consciousness, either in the store consciousness or my mind consciousness, that keeps me separate. So to sit not only with the not knowing, but also for me, it's been more of a practice of sitting with what's in the way. Why is it that I have a resistance to merging or being one with the koan, however we want to say that. And I think there's lots of different ways to look at what koan practice requires of us in terms of the original teachings of the Buddha. Another thing that occurred to me recently was that every time a new koan comes up, I'm faced with experiencing firsthand kind of the two truths, the relative and the absolute. That I'm Andy, I'm sitting here in a stereo, and yet from an absolute perspective, I'm not Andy, right? I'm made up of other things. My existence is empty, just like everything else's. All right. So a koan comes up, I feel my separation, right? I feel separate from it. Hopefully over time, then I can let go of some of that and experience what merging with the koan is. Maybe that's a little bit, a little way of experiencing the absolute. Letting go of my sense of separation. And in little increments. I think koan practice is a way of doing that. Not necessarily just a kind of a rite of passage, or as I've heard it referred to before, just Zen theater. There's a little more, I think, to realize from Zen practice if we approach it maybe from this way, if it's helpful, which it was for me. So I thought I would share that, and hopefully that would be helpful to those of us that may be considering whether or not to continue with koan practice, which happens a lot for me personally too. So thank you. And if anyone likes to comment or has anything they'd like to share, please do.